Air France, a name recognized worldwide, a symbol of French aviation prowess. It carried a legacy of connecting nations. Millions of passengers entrusted their journeys to this airline. Flight AF 447 from Rio to Paris. An Airbus A330-200, a sophisticated jet. On May 31, 2009, it stood ready. Passengers boarded, thinking of Paris. The Airbus pushed back, engines spooling. Air France 447 ascended into the darkening sky. It left the vibrant lights of the Brazilian coast behind. The aircraft set its course northeast, towards the equator. Below lay the immense, unforgiving Atlantic Ocean, a vast watery wilderness stretching for thousands of miles. This was a realm where aircraft become tiny specks, alone against the backdrop of night and nature. The pilots guided their charge into this profound isolation. On board were 216 passengers, a diverse group from 32 different nations. Each individual carried their own hopes and plans. Families looking forward to shared experiences, professionals en route to important commitments, students embarking on new chapters in their lives. They settled into their seats for the long overnight journey, unaware of the invisible forces gathering ahead. In the cockpit, a crew of 3, the captain, 58, with over 11,000 flying hours, his first officer, 37, and a second officer, 32. Together, they possessed considerable flight experience. The initial hours of the flight passed without incident. The Airbus cruised smoothly at its designated altitude. Autopilot systems managed the aircraft's trajectory. Routine communications were made with air traffic control. As the flight progressed, it approached a notorious weather zone, the Intertropical Convergence Zone, or ITCZ, known to pilots for its powerful thunderstorms. These storms can build rapidly, reaching great heights, creating areas of extreme turbulence and icing conditions. Navigating this region required careful attention. Crews typically diverted around the most intense weather cells. This was a standard challenge, yet tonight it would prove fatal. Then, the unthinkable began to unfold. Deep over the central Atlantic, far from any land, beyond the reach of conventional radar systems, the aircraft started transmitting a series of automated messages. These were error reports sent via its ACARS system. They indicated a cascade of critical system failures. Flight control computers were struggling. Key instruments faltered. The autopilot suddenly, unexpectedly, disconnected. On the ground, no immediate alarm bells rang. These ACARS messages were streams of technical data. They were not direct distress calls from the pilots. Brazilian air traffic controllers had already handed off the flight. Their counterparts in Senegal were not yet expecting contact. For a crucial period, AF 447 flew through a void. No one on the ground was actively monitoring its precise status. The ocean held its emerging secret close. Air France Flight 447 never made its next scheduled radio call. It failed to check in with Dakar Air Traffic Control. It did not appear on their radar screens as expected. As minutes stretched into an hour, then more. A chilling realization began to dawn on officials. A modern, sophisticated airliner had vanished without a trace. In an age of constant connectivity, this seemed impossible. The routine flight was now officially missing. The silence from the mid-Atlantic became a roar of concern. The flight was catastrophically overdue. At Charles de Gaulle Airport, an air of anxious dread descended. Families and friends awaited news that would not come, or at least, not the news they desperately hoped for. The world was about to learn of a profound aviation mystery. The loss of Air France 447 and all 228 souls aboard. A desperate search was about to commence in the vast empty ocean. The Airbus A330, designated AF 447, taxied towards its departure runway. Its powerful engines hummed, a promise of the journey ahead. Inside, 216 passengers settled into their seats. They were a mix of nationalities, ages, and purposes. The cabin crew conducted final checks. Outside, Rio de Janeiro's lights twinkled under a dark sky. The aircraft awaited clearance, a silent giant ready for flight. A routine departure, yet this one was marked by fate. The air was filled with the quiet anticipation of travel. Clearance was granted. The engines roared to life. Flight AF 447 accelerated down the runway with immense power. It lifted gracefully into the humid night air of Brazil. The city lights receded below, shrinking with every passing second. The aircraft banked, setting its course towards the northeast. Its destination was Paris, a long transatlantic voyage away. The initial climb was smooth, executed flawlessly by the machine. Pilots monitored their instruments, guiding the ascent. They were experienced aviators, familiar with this route. Below them, the land gave way to the vast, dark ocean. Inside the cabin, the seatbelt signs were eventually switched off. Passengers began to relax, adjusting to the long haul. Some read books, others watched movies on their personal screens. The cabin crew started their service, moving through the aisles. Drinks were offered and the scent of airline meals subtly filled the air. For most, this was just another overnight flight, a period of suspended time between two continents. Children perhaps slept, while adults chatted quietly or sought rest. The atmosphere was calm, typical of a late-night departure. Few, if any, would have felt a sense of impending unease. The aircraft reached its initial cruising altitude, around 35,000 feet. Here, the air was thin and cold, the stars brilliant. The autopilot system was engaged, maintaining course and speed. The flight was progressing normally according to plan. The first few hours passed without any significant event. Routine position reports were made to air traffic control. The pilots would have been monitoring flight parameters, checking weather updates for the path that lay ahead. Everything appeared nominal, a standard Atlantic crossing unfolding. The journey continued deeper into the equatorial night. As Air France 447 flew further northeast, it approached a challenging region. This area is known to mariners and aviators alike. The Intertropical Convergence Zone, often called the ITCZ. It is a belt of low pressure that encircles the Earth near the equator. Here, the trade winds of the northern and southern hemispheres meet. This meeting creates an area of significant weather activity. Pilots are well aware of its potential hazards. Navigating it requires skill, experience, and careful planning. The ITCZ is a dynamic and often unpredictable weather feature. Its intensity can vary greatly from day to day. The primary concern within the ITCZ is the presence of towering thunderstorms. These cumulonimbus clouds can extend to incredible altitudes, often reaching well above the cruising levels of commercial airliners. They are associated with severe turbulence, capable of jolting an aircraft violently. Lightning is a common occurrence, spectacular but usually not a direct threat. More critically, these storms contain supercooled water droplets. These droplets can freeze instantly on contact with an aircraft's surfaces, leading to the rapid accumulation of ice, a serious aerodynamic hazard. The flight crew of AF 447 would have been monitoring their onboard weather radar, seeking paths to avoid the most intense storm cells. The pilots were not flying blind into this volatile zone. Modern airliners are equipped with sophisticated weather radar systems. These systems display precipitation intensity ahead of the aircraft, allowing crews to identify and navigate around the worst areas. Standard procedure is to deviate, sometimes by many miles, to find smoother air. However, the ITCZ can present a complex, widespread area of storms. Sometimes, finding a clear path through can be difficult. The crew of AF 447 would have been discussing their strategy, weighing options, considering fuel and passenger comfort. This was a routine challenge, but one that demanded respect. As the Airbus entered the fringes of the ITCZ, conditions likely changed. The smooth ride may have given way to light, then moderate turbulence. The seatbelt sign might have been illuminated again as a precaution. Passengers would have felt the aircraft moving more actively. In the cockpit, the pilots would be intensely focused on navigation, making small adjustments to their heading and altitude, trying to weave their way through the meteorological maze. They were expected to report any significant weather deviations. The conditions they were encountering were not entirely unexpected. Yet, the specific combination of factors this night would prove critical. At approximately 1:35 Coordinated Universal Time, Air France 447 made its last routine voice communication. The crew reported their position to Brazilian air traffic controllers. They confirmed they were at flight level 350 or 35,000 feet, and that they expected to reach the Tassel waypoint at 2:20 UTC. This waypoint marked a point in the mid-Atlantic. The communication was standard, giving no hint of any problems. The flight was then instructed to contact Dakar Oceanic Control. This was the air traffic control center in Senegal. They would manage the next segment of the flight. The aircraft was now entering an area of sparse radar coverage. Over vast stretches of the ocean, ground-based radar cannot reach. Air traffic control relies on periodic position reports from aircraft. These reports are typically made via high-frequency radio or satellite data link. There is no continuous, real-time tracking as there is over land. AF-447 was flying into this procedural airspace, a silent, vast expanse where each aircraft is a distant voice. The handover from Brazilian to Senegalese control was imminent, but that next expected call to Dakar would never come. The aircraft was moving further into the darkness and isolation. Then, starting at 2:10 UTC, something went profoundly wrong. The aircraft began to transmit a series of automated messages. These were sent via the Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, or ACARS, a data link system used for sending short messages between aircraft and ground stations. These were not voice calls from the pilots. They were bursts of data, indicating system failures. The first message indicated the autopilot had disengaged. Subsequent messages pointed to problems with air data systems. Critical information like airspeed was becoming unreliable. A cascade of warnings illuminated the cockpit displays. These ACARS messages painted a picture of a rapidly deteriorating situation. They spoke of inconsistencies between different airspeed sensors. They reported failures in flight control computers and navigation systems. The aircraft was effectively losing its ability to understand its environment, and the pilots were losing some of their automated assistance. For approximately 4 minutes, these messages continued, a digital cry for help, unheard in real time by human ears. The final message was transmitted at 2:14 UTC. It indicated a problem with the cabin's vertical speed. Then an eerie, complete silence descended from flight AF-447. The Airbus A330 relied on precise data from external sensors. Among the most critical were the PTO tubes. These small heated probes measure air pressure, translating it into airspeed. Airspeed is fundamental for flight, telling pilots how fast they are moving. These tubes were about to become a critical point of failure. As Air France 447 penetrated dense clouds, it encountered conditions ripe for icing. Supercooled water droplets and ice crystals are hazardous for PTO tubes. Ice could obstruct the PTO tubes, leading to erroneous airspeed readings. This discrepancy was the first link in a fatal chain. The pilots would soon face a confusing and dangerous situation. With inconsistent airspeed data flooding its systems, the Airbus A330's brain faced a critical dilemma. The autopilot, reliant on accurate airspeed information, could no longer maintain safe control. At 2:10 and 5 seconds UTC, the autopilot disengaged. Suddenly the pilots were required to fly the aircraft manually. They were in the heart of a turbulent storm system, in the dead of night, over the remote Atlantic Ocean. The transition from automated to manual flight was unexpected. A cavalry charge alarm, a loud repetitive chime, sounded in the cockpit. This signaled the autopilot disconnection. Pilots are trained extensively for manual flight. However, the circumstances were far from ideal. They were likely experiencing turbulence. Visibility outside the cockpit would have been non-existent. They were surrounded by the raging elements of the storm, and crucially, they were now faced with unreliable airspeed indications. The very instruments needed to fly safely were lying. The pilots had to interpret a confusing array of conflicting information. The loss of the autopilot also coincided with other warnings. The automated systems began to flag numerous inconsistencies. Understanding the root cause of these simultaneous failures in a high-stress, rapidly evolving situation was a monumental task. The aircraft was no longer a placid, automated machine. The Airbus A330 is a fly-by-wire aircraft. Pilot inputs are processed by computers before commanding control surfaces. In normal law, these computers provide flight envelope protections. These protections prevent the aircraft from exceeding certain limits. However, normal law depends on reliable air data. When the airspeed data became corrupted, the system transitioned to alternate law. This means many built-in safety nets are removed. The aircraft responds more directly to pilot inputs. The pilots of Air France 447 faced a maelstrom of weather and confusing information. Their primary flight displays showed unreliable airspeeds. The stall warning, a loud and insistent siren, began to sound. This created a profound dilemma for the crew. The aircraft was in manual flight, in alternate law. Echoes from the cabin lives interrupted. 216 individuals, each one a unique story, a life in progress. They hailed from 32 different countries, a global mosaic of dreams and destinations. Business travelers hoped for successful meetings. Holidaymakers anticipated Parisian sights and sounds. Families were reuniting or starting new adventures. Students looked forward to learning and discovery. Love stories were mid-chapter, friendships in bloom. On board Air France 447, a world of human experience was gathered. Imagine a young couple, perhaps on their honeymoon. Their journey was filled with joy and shared futures. They might have been whispering plans, holding hands. Elsewhere, a seasoned executive reviewed important notes, his mind focused on the work week ahead in Europe. A mother gently cradled her sleeping child. Her thoughts were likely of family, of comfort, of arrival. These were ordinary people caught in an extraordinary moment. Their individual narratives were about to converge. Guardians in the storm, the cabin crew's ordeal. The cabin crew numbered 12 individuals. They were the face of Air France for the passengers. More than just service providers, they were safety professionals, trained extensively for emergency situations, prepared for the unexpected, from medical issues to security threats. Their primary role was the well-being and safety of everyone on board. They knew the aircraft, its exits, its emergency equipment. A calm demeanor was part of their professional code, even when facing their own potential fears. They were the guardians within the aluminum tube. In the initial hours, their duties were standard. They welcomed passengers with smiles and assistance. They ensured cabin security before takeoff and landing. Service was conducted with grace and attentiveness. They answered questions, offered comfort, managed minor requests. They were a reassuring presence in the confined space. Moving through the aisles, they were a constant, a symbol of normalcy in the artificial environment of flight. They represented order, control, and the airline's promise. Cockpit under siege, a human crisis. In the cockpit, 3 pilots fought for control. Captain Marc Dubois, 58, was highly experienced. First Officer David Robert, 37, was also seasoned. Second Officer Pierre-Cedric Bonin, 32, was at the controls. When the crisis began, he was the one flying. Together, they represented thousands of hours of flight time. They were trained for emergencies, for system failures. But the sequence of events this night was insidious. It began with a seemingly minor sensor problem. It quickly escalated into a full-blown flight crisis. The sudden disconnection of the autopilot was jarring. The accompanying alarms shattered the cockpit's relative calm. Unreliable airspeed readings appeared on their displays. The aircraft switched to alternate law, protections diminishing. Information became contradictory, confusing, overwhelming. They were flying manually in a violent storm. With instruments they could no longer fully trust. The psychological pressure must have been immense. To diagnose, to communicate, to act decisively. The silence from Air France 447 was deafening. Hours passed with no contact, no sign of the aircraft. At airports in Paris and Rio, anxiety turned to dread. Families waited, desperate for news that refused to come. Aviation authorities faced a terrifying possibility. A modern airliner had vanished over the vast Atlantic. The search and rescue mission was initiated with urgency. It was a race against time, against the immense ocean. The world watched, hoping for a miracle, fearing the worst. The mystery of Flight 447 had begun its grim chapter. Brazil and France quickly mobilized their military resources. Aircraft and ships were dispatched to the suspected crash area. This was a remote stretch of ocean, far from land. The search zone was enormous, hundreds of square nautical miles. Other nations, including the United States, offered assistance. International cooperation was immediate, a united front against tragedy. Search planes flew grid patterns, scanning the endless waves. Naval vessels prepared for the grim task of recovery. The challenge was immense, like finding a needle in a colossal haystack. The first days were filled with desperate hope and growing despair. The recovery of floating debris confirmed the crash location, but it did not explain the cause of the disaster. For that, investigators needed the aircraft's flight recorders, commonly known as the black boxes. These devices, the Cockpit Voice Recorder, CVR, and Flight Data Recorder, FDR, held the key to understanding AF-447's final moments. They were designed to withstand immense impact and pressure, but they lay somewhere on the deep ocean floor. Finding them became the absolute priority for the investigation. A new, incredibly complex phase of the search began. The search area was narrowed, but the ocean depths were formidable. The seabed in this region lay thousands of meters below the surface. Specialized equipment was required for such a deep-sea operation. French authorities, led by the BEA, Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety, took charge. They deployed research vessels equipped with sophisticated sonar. Autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, were used to scan the ocean floor. These robotic submarines methodically mapped the dark, silent abyss. The pressure at these depths is crushing, the environment hostile. The first underwater search phases were painstaking and slow. They yielded no sign of the main wreckage or the precious recorders. Months turned into a year, then nearly 2 years. The initial search efforts, despite immense dedication, were unsuccessful. Hope of finding the black boxes began to dwindle. Some wondered if the mystery of AF-447 would ever be solved. The families of the victims endured an agonizing wait. They needed answers, closure, and accountability if warranted. The aviation world also waited, eager for lessons to prevent future tragedies. The financial cost of the search was enormous, but the human cost of not knowing was even greater. The BEA remained determined, planning for further search attempts. In early 2011, a new search phase commenced. This effort utilized even more advanced technology. The Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution from the United States joined the mission. They brought new AUVs, equipped with high-resolution sonar. After meticulously searching a newly defined area, based on refined calculations of drift and descent, a breakthrough finally came in April 2011. The AUVs detected a significant debris field on the ocean floor. There, amidst the wreckage, lay the main fuselage of AF-447. And, crucially, the flight recorders were soon located. The discovery of the main wreckage was pivotal. The Remora 6000, a remotely operated vehicle, descended nearly 4,000 meters to the crash site. Within days, the ROV located the bright orange casings. The flight data recorder was recovered on May 1, 2011. The Cockpit voice recorder followed shortly after. Miraculously, both recorders were found to be in good condition. The voices and data from Flight 447 were about to be heard. The mystery was unraveling, revealing a story of human and technical failure. The French Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety, the BEA, delivered its final report. This document was the culmination of years of meticulous investigation. It held the official explanation for the loss of Air France 447. The world awaited its conclusions with bated breath. Families of the victims sought answers and accountability. The aviation industry looked for lessons to prevent future tragedies. The report detailed a complex chain of events. It painted a clear yet heartbreaking picture of the aircraft's final moments. The BEA's findings would resonate deeply across global aviation. Its thoroughness aimed to bring clarity to the profound mystery. The investigation confirmed the initial trigger, the icing of PTO probes. These crucial sensors, meant to measure airspeed, faltered. They became obstructed by ice crystals high in the storm clouds. This led to unreliable airspeed indications being sent to the flight computers. As a direct consequence, the autopilot disengaged abruptly. The aircraft's automated systems could no longer trust the data they received. This placed the crew in manual control under highly challenging conditions. They were flying in darkness, amidst turbulence with failing instruments. The loss of accurate airspeed was the first critical link. A seemingly small sensor issue escalated into a life-threatening crisis. The BEA's analysis then focused critically on the human element. The pilots, confronted with confusing and contradictory information, reacted. The co-pilot at the controls made persistent nose-up inputs. This action, likely intended to prevent a perceived loss of altitude or speed, was detrimental. It raised the aircraft's nose excessively, increasing its angle of attack. The aircraft slowed down and entered an aerodynamic stall. Crucially, the crew did not seem to recognize the stall condition, or, if they did not apply the correct recovery procedures. The stall warning sounded almost continuously, yet the nose remained high. This failure to diagnose and react appropriately was a key factor. The aircraft remained in a stalled state for over 3 minutes. It descended rapidly from its cruising altitude towards the ocean. The BA concluded that the pilots never regained control. Their inputs did not arrest the stall. In some cases, they prolonged it. The final report highlighted the inconsistency in airspeed measurements, the autopilot disconnection and the subsequent flight control law reconfigurations, and the inappropriate crew responses to these cascading failures. It was a tragic interplay of technical malfunction and human factors. No single cause was to blame, but a sequence of interconnected events. The lessons learned would need to address both machine and man. Section 2. Rewriting the Manual. Training for the Unthinkable. The findings from the Air France 447 investigation sent shockwaves. They reverberated through pilot training centers worldwide. A stark realization dawned. Existing training protocols had gaps. Pilots were not adequately prepared for such a complex sequence of failures, especially the challenge of high-altitude stalls with unreliable airspeed. The tragedy became a powerful catalyst for profound change. Aviation authorities and airlines recognized the urgent need for reform. Pilot training curricula required significant updates. The focus shifted to better equip crews for unexpected extreme situations. The goal was to prevent a similar catastrophe from ever happening again. Section 3. Fortifying the Future. Technology and Protocols Reborn. The Air France 447 tragedy spurred critical reviews of aircraft technology and procedures. PTO tubes vulnerable to icing were redesigned and rigorously tested. Ensuring reliable airspeed data became paramount. The quest for improved technology became a global priority. Retrofitting fleets was a significant undertaking but essential. Providing pilots with reliable airspeed information is crucial for safety. The legacy of Air France 447 is a safer sky, forged through painful lessons. Section 1. A chasm in the sky, a scar on hearts. The story of Air France Flight 447 is one of profound tragedy. 228 souls embarked on a journey. Instead, it met a swift and devastating end. Deep within the dark, turbulent heart of the Atlantic Ocean, 32 nations mourned their citizens, their friends, their loved ones. Each life lost represented a unique world of experiences, extinguished far too soon. The void left behind was immeasurable, a chasm of grief and disbelief. A routine flight, expected by all, transformed into an international catastrophe. For many long months, the disappearance of AF 447 remained a chilling enigma. A modern marvel of aviation technology vanishing without a single trace. It seemed almost impossible in an age of constant global connection. Speculation was rife, numerous theories abounded, but concrete answers were elusive. The vast, unforgiving ocean held its secrets tightly, unyieldingly. This profound uncertainty only intensified the anguish for those left behind. Not knowing the fate of their loved ones was a persistent torment, a painful limbo suspended between fading hope and encroaching despair. The world watched, captivated by the unfolding mystery and the intensive search. The disappearance severely shook public confidence in air travel's perceived invincibility. The eventual recovery of the black boxes was a monumental breakthrough. It promised to finally peel back the layers of enduring mystery. The crucial data retrieved painted a harrowing, detailed picture of the final minutes, a complex cascade of failures, both technical in origin and human in response. The insidious icing of the PTO tubes initiated the fatal chain of events. The reliable autopilot disengaged abruptly, thrusting the crew into a maelstrom. Confusion, unreliable instrument readings, and tragically incorrect responses followed. The truth, when it ultimately emerged from the depths, was complex and deeply unsettling. It offered definitive answers, but also laid bare the critical vulnerabilities. The stark reality of the prolonged stall and uncontrolled descent was hard to comprehend. The conclusion of the exhaustive investigation brought a form of painful closure, yet it also cemented the heartbreaking, unalterable reality of the loss. The BEA's comprehensive final report detailed the sequence with clinical precision, but for the grieving families it was a confirmation of their very worst fears. The human element, the pilots' desperate struggle in the besieged cockpit, was poignant. They were experienced professionals, ultimately overwhelmed by an unprecedented, confusing situation. The tragedy starkly underscored the critical interplay between machine and human operators, and how quickly things can unravel when that delicate interface breaks down catastrophically. The impact was not just emotional for the world, but also deeply psychological for aviation. Questions lingered about how such a deadly sequence could unfold unchallenged on a modern jet. Section 2. Echoes of AF 447, a legacy of change. The immense loss of Air France Flight 447 was not in vain. Its echoes resonated powerfully throughout the global aviation industry. The findings spurred a re-evaluation of safety protocols. Pilot training programs underwent significant reforms. Airlines and regulatory bodies addressed the identified shortcomings. The tragedy became a catalyst for widespread improvement. The commitment to learning from this event was deep and sincere. The future safety of millions of passengers depended on these lessons. A new era of heightened vigilance and proactive adaptation was ushered in. The enduring legacy of Air France 447 is woven into modern aviation safety. It serves as a constant reminder of the high stakes involved. Air France 447 remains a significant milestone in aviation history. Its story stands as a testament to learning, adapting, and striving to protect every precious life.